I've decided my sketchbook images today, the pictures that I make while I'm walking, will be loosely a study. Yes, that sounds very formal. A study in dappled light. Dappled light is a constant problem for me as a wedding photographer, because having people half in, half out of light is just often is a complete nightmare to edit. But when you're in nature, dappled light, flecks of light, shafts of light, pools of light, I think can be very pleasing to the eye. So that's what I'm going to do. Let me find, I'm in woodland at the moment, so finding dappled light on what is a very sunny morning is really not very difficult to find. So let's, I've got my X100. Let's shoot at f2.8, 320 shutter speed. It's just the floor of the woodland here with the trees casting shadows across it. Oh, Pups has walked straight into shot. Pups, come on, out the way. 160 ISO, and there we go. The start of my study of dappled light. Come on, Pups, this way. I think we've established on this show how photography can be a force de jour when it comes to mental health, and I'll add to that mental agility, because there's a lot of problem solving going on when you make a picture. There's going to be a bit of problem solving going on it's been really rainy the last few days in particular, so this dry path, there we go, problem solving, navigating my way through this bit here so I don't start off with soggy feet. Yes, so there's a lot of problem solving going on when you make a picture. I often look through the viewfinder and I see an entirely different world to the one that I was surveying previously with my naked eye. And I don't think I'll ever tire of that. I think that's part of the fun, isn't it? It's not always better when you look through the viewfinder. There are definitely times when I think, this is a moment to witness rather than photograph. It can work that way. But over the past, 3 years or so, we've had many, many letters into the show where you've suggested that you feel your anxiety dissipates when you're composing a photograph, that your present is not the one where you're thinking about all the stuff that's been troubling you, but a present that absorbs you in a much more positive, mindful way, one that can give you an outlet for your emotions, a bit like keeping a diary, only with pictures. And I purposefully mention keeping a diary because if you switch this talk of positive creation and creativity to writing now, I think the same can be said for writing as it can for photography when it comes to that mindful creative outlet. I think there are some really important parallels between the two, both photography and writing. They involve capturing, if you don't mind me using the capture word, capturing moments and emotions and stories. They might be through different mediums, but it's the same sort of process. Just as we as photographers frame a scene and decide what to include or exclude, a writer, well, they do the same thing, really, choosing their words and constructing narratives to convey their ideas or the feelings that they want us to feel as readers. I think you'd agree that both require a bit of a keen eye for detail, yes? You also need to have a sense of timing. And most importantly, a phrase often used here on the show, have the ability to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. And I'm not talking about writing novels here. I'm referring to something many of us do as photographers, actually, blogging. Or Instagram. Let's take Instagram. Now, I know not everybody does this, but the way I usually write, certainly on my photographic grid for my business, for the wedding pictures, I try to explain what I was feeling or what I thought the subject might be feeling when the photograph was made. So I'm hoping today's guest, Merryn Glover, a writer, and I might also add the words creative explorer to her description, will at times today be quite revelatory, as we try to unpick on the show today how writing can be something that, just like photography, takes you to a creative plane or takes you on a creative journey that's deeply enriching. And before you think, oh, Neil, this all sounds a bit philosophical, complete spoiler alert, but as Merryn, who is the author of 4 books, 3 of them novels, and the workshop leader on the creative writing morning of our Scottish photo retreat, says, even your shopping list can be classed as writing. So I think you'll enjoy hearing from an author on the show today, a day where photography and writing come together, because if you think about it, this show, in many respects, in fact, nearly all respects, is a show led by writing, i.e., your letters.
Today on the Photo Walk.
What I was told quite often was, Merryn, you're such a dreamer. And I was often just away in my own world. Yeah. Writing is perhaps just the adult version of talking to yourself. One thing that seems to be clear for everybody is that in an age of AI, what becomes most important to us is the human being. I'm always very wary of rules in my own tutoring of writing because the greatest writers break them all the time. I'm sure it's the same with rules in photography.
Very much.
There is a therapeutic opportunity in writing for us to find out what we think and what we feel. Photographers' vision is an incredibly important sense. And it is for me too. I'm powerfully moved by colour and shape and the things that I see.
That's Merryn Glover, who's going to show the bond, I think, between writing and photography today. Welcome along as we make our photo walks together. A show where we walk and make pictures, photographically sketchbooking our time each week, enjoying the letters and inspirational stories you've sent in and listening back to special studio conversations with guests from around the world. I'll take a peek into the mailbag in a moment for a flavour of today's letters into the show, but before that, thank you to our Extra Milers and MPB who sponsor this show and keep us here, walking week on week. MPB is the largest global platform to buy, sell and trade in used photo and video gear, committed to making gear more accessible, more affordable. It's a service I've been using myself for many years. And can I put my planet head on for a moment? Because let me give you a few more reasons why I am delighted MPB support this podcast. First up, MPB is not a marketplace. They buy directly from visual storytellers, like you, like me, and they evaluate all items before they resell MPB-approved kit. Circularity. That's at the centre of MPB's ethos. They promote sustainability, diversity, and inclusion in everything they do. And whilst I know that sounds a bit like a press release, I've seen this with my own eyes every time I visit the UK HQ. Their business model is 100% circular. All packaging is 100% plastic-free, and their cloud-based platform uses 100% renewable electricity. So buy, sell, trade and create. Take a moment to look at their platform today as you change the way you photograph and buy and trade kit. Go to mpb.com/change. On the show today then, I'm starting in a moment with a story of change. This one being from Egypt. It's a photo story made by Extra Miler Paul Hutson that handholds the feelings of today's show perfectly. Some thoughts today on the lengths photojournalists make and take to tell the story. Allin Sorenson's photographic memories of July 4th with a poem along the path that celebrates the stillness of a shutter's blink. Herbert Holzman from Bavaria land has been creating a smoky operatic scene in the forest. Plus, we'll make a shutter sync and remind you of this month's assignment. Right, lots to do. Shall we walk? Checklist out. Coffee. Check. Garibaldi's. Check. I ran out earlier this week. Walking shoes. Check. SD cards or a spare roll of film. Check. And pen and paper to note down our travels inspired by today's guest. Let's walk. Walking today across, it's got many names. It's called Deer Park, which is not the official title. It's just that you often see a lot of deer here. Deer here, so I keep a watchful eye over Sir Barkalot. since he's taken to the odd play chase. He's pretty good. So it's called that. It's called The Wreck. It's called The Old Dump. All sorts of names. I think it's fantastic. It's completely overgrown at the moment. The wilds have taken over, so they have. The Photo Walk is a show for those who find escapism and peace away from the noise of this world, putting miles under our feet and making a picture or three to remind us of where those footprints were left. Oh, look at this. Huge thistles. Hang on. Hold on to that thought for a moment while I make my way around those safely. And you're a part of this with your pictures and your letters, your postcards, your thoughts. If you like what you hear today, please consider clicking subscribe on your podcast player app. Reviews really help me understand, help me understand you actually and what you like. So if you're using Apple or Spotify, I'd be very grateful of a review. Right, letters. Now, I want to start with something I sort of commissioned, really. Although this had been written a while back by a very good friend of the show, a photographer and writer called Paul Hutson. You know Paul, don't you? Yeah, I know Paul, Neil. Of course I do. One of our wonderful Extra Milers as well. I rang him at the start of the week, this week, and asked him if I could use one of his super photo essays, stroke letters, that he writes about the people he meets as he photographs them and the places he visits. And he obliged with one that I don't think is on his website at the moment. And, I'll link to the writing that he does have on his website on the show page today. But today is about creative writing and photography. So I'll do my best to bring to audio life Paul's words in a photo story about a visit to Egypt called The Sad Cafe. The picture for this piece, the accompanying picture, is on the show page, and I think the picture itself says everything that's important or magical about making photographs that celebrate where we tread in this world. It's a photograph of a cafe. It's not, Paul, I'm sure you'd agree, it's not necessarily a truly expressive picture of a cafe, or is it? After you've heard this story, you may feel that it is. And unusually, I'm not going to read the letter as I walk, or the story as I walk. I'm going to cross back to my studio self just for this photo essay, if you like, from Paul Hutson, The Sad Cafe.
After the Second World War, socialism provided a utopian future for the working classes. Egypt followed this beacon of hope with the overthrow of King Farouk in 1952 and the establishment of Mohammed Naguib as president of the new republic. Nasser succeeded Naguib in 1956 and began introducing socialist policies in 1962. By the time I visited Egypt in 1990, the spirit of 45 had disintegrated in Great Britain. Cairo was a teeming and ever-expanding metropolis just a few kilometers from the famous pyramids at Giza, where my girlfriend and I visited these ancient and colossal structures. We also went to the Cairo Museum to see Tutankhamun's death mask and his other treasures, gaped across a high panorama of the city from Cairo Tower, and wandered about the Souk Quarter, taking in the heat, the smells and the bustle of the crowds. Making an exhausted retreat, we found ourselves in a quiet and dusty Cairo backstreet, searching for somewhere to rest aching legs and quench parched throats. In the space of 20 meters, we came across a little dilapidated cafe set back from the road, looking forlorn and forgotten. Curious, we ventured into the dark and dusky-smelling interior. There were no customers, which would normally have put us off. An old man with a wrinkled face regarded me with suspicion from behind a counter, which hadn't been cleaned for some time. I knew they wouldn't sell beer, but nor did they serve coffee, and there didn't appear to be any bottled water. We didn't fancy yet another glass of tea, so I reluctantly pointed at small bottles of 7-Up, then held up 2 fingers. The old man scribbled the cost on a dog-eared scrap of paper and held it up. I didn't haggle and paid him slightly more with a crisp new banknote. We sat down at a table near the window, looking out into the bright, sunlit street, and waited for our drinks. I heard him open the bottles and pour. The escaping gas made a short hiss. At least the lemonade wasn't flat. He shuffled over with our drinks and, with shaking hands threatening to spill the contents, carefully placed the glasses in front of us. I smiled and said shukran. Avoiding eye contact, he nodded, then retreated back behind the counter. I looked about the cafe. It was very shabby, and there was a distinctly dank odour about the place, rather incongruous in this arid climate. A high-pitched smell of dust seemed to emanate from a thick green carpet running down the centre of the room, and in combination with a smell of damp formed an unpleasant miasma. Along the adjacent wall, a similar table to ours was draped with a cloth and overlaid with an additional transparent plastic cover. On top there were grubby-looking menus with splatters of an earlier meal dappled across them. In the centre of the table, next to a silver salt cellar, was one of those semi-enclosed and two-tone ashtrays I remember from the 60s. Metal-framed stools with thick cushions of yellow, cream and red were arranged around the perimeter. Some of the cushions were compressed as though heavy customers were still sitting on them, while others were discoloured with mould. A narrow shelf ran around the walls just above table height, holding bottles of Coca-Cola, Canada Dry tonic water, and an orange drink. My roaming eyes then fell upon two pictures above mirrored panels. One was a colour photograph of a boy in a white jalabia being embraced by Hosni Mubarak, the fourth president of Egypt. The other was a print of the third president, Anwar Sadat, regaled in military uniform and set in a large white plate. I looked again at the photograph with Hosni Mubarak and wondered where it was taken and who the boy was. The old man behind the counter detected my interest. "My son," he proclaimed in English, having anticipated my question. I must have shown my surprise, so he did speak English. "He meet my son. I very proud, but like Sadat, Mubarak full of empty promises." I was going to smile in empathy, but an expression of despair had filled his face. Egypt finished, cafe finished, all very sad. He gestured around the room as if pointing to the evidence of the decline of his nation and of his business. With that, he turned and, with a posture of utter melancholy, shuffled through a curtain of beads into a back room. We looked at one another, but remained silent in case he was listening. Perhaps the owner had once been patriotic and the pictures had been put up to reflect that. Perhaps they'd also once represented his aspiration for a more prosperous future for himself and his son. Where was his son now? There was a heavy silence. I looked down from the grimy tabletop supporting the now empty glasses of lemonade to the faded green carpet, perhaps a metaphor for the hope he once held when he fitted out this strange 60s-looking cafe. While life bustled along the main street, he, and perhaps his son, had been left behind. It felt a sad little place. We stood up to leave, making some noise to draw back his attention, but the man did not reappear. I took one final look around and imagined what it might have been in that promised Egyptian utopia. Pulling the stiff old door open, we stepped out into a blaze of light and heat.
I think that's a wonderfully written piece from Paul Hutson to go with a very simple picture on the show page today of where he was when he encountered the cafe owner in his story called The Sad Cafe. Now, in this story, Paul didn't photograph the cafe owner, preferring to make a portrait of the scene instead. And I think you can think of a scene as a portrait. You can have a portrait of a scene. It doesn't have to be a person. But he's actually exceptionally good at photographing strangers and then writing stories about those that he meets along his adventures in life, and that's why I asked him to return to talk about photographing strangers on our special about just that subject next week. So Extra Milers have already heard Paul talking about photographing strangers a couple of weeks ago, but there was more of the conversation, and you'll hear that when we do our special next week. I actually met Hutson of York, or Paul, on our very first photo walk retreat on the Isle of Wight, and he'd subsequently come back to Scotland as well. I always remember receiving his application to come along on it. I went straight to his website, as often I do when somebody contacts me for the first time, and I was completely bowled over by the fact I'd found a photographer who was also a darn good writer. His stories, which I will link to, are an utter pleasure to read. Very honest, very vulnerable. He's been building a new website, so there's not as many stories as there were when I originally went there, but I recommend you take a read. And not to spare your blushes, Paul, but you certainly inspired me to think more about my own writing, which I'm not quite sure you know or wish to be responsible for, of course, but you did. So there, it's your fault. Now, I need a bit of help, please. It really helps the show to be discovered if you leave a review on Apple Podcasts. To do that, just go to the Apple Podcasts app, search up The Photo Walk, and then leave a few words as a review. You can do the same thing on Spotify. That way, the great podcast sphere recognises us more and suggests us to more people who like to walk with us. I thought I may start to read some of them out to you, not in a "oh, look at me" kind of way, but a grateful "I wish I could buy you a small bottle of 7-Up at the Egyptian bar" kind of way. So this from Archangeli, who's one of our newer listeners, actually. I read this on Apple Podcasts only the other day. 5-star review as well. Thank you so much for that. Hooked, he wrote, after 2 episodes. Balsam for brains. Take a walk, give it a try. Archangeli from Finland on Apple Podcasts. Now, thank you very much for your lovely review. As Eric Morecambe from Morecambe and Wise once said, and I'm not sure you had Morecambe and Wise in Finland, but as Eric Morecambe once said, thank you for your support. I shall wear it always. I tell you what, last weekend, now that ended with some real highs and lows. As a football fan, as an England fan, I'd hoped for the heady heights of watching my nation win a cup, which wasn't to be. 58 years of hurt, etc., et al. Though, if I were truly honest, the Spanish were the better team all the way through the contest. So if we had, after we'd equalised, if we had then gone on to nick it, I'd have celebrated. But I think there would have been a healthy dose of, "Oh, you got away with that one," involved in my celebration. So well done, Spain. Euro champions in the football. World Cup to come. What will we say then? 60 years of hurt. And so the song goes on. And so, yes, a high to a low as far as the result went. But by far the most surprising low was in the early hours of Sunday morning as our eldest stood above me in the bedroom, shook my shoulders and said, Dad, are you awake? You need to come and watch the news." And of course I'm referring to the story of Donald Trump being shot at and the gun violence at that rally. Now, I'm always aware that I try to be the balsam for your thoughts. Well, I am now. And mindfulness in terms of how this podcast is presented. And so I tend to steer clear of politics, appreciating that we had a soupçon of that in the opening letter, of course. But in terms of photography, I've had a number of mails and messages providing a link to Evan Vucci, who was the AP photographer, Associated Press, who made a set of pictures during those 2 minutes that will undoubtedly go on to be an iconic set of pictures of a historical moment. The pictures include Donald Trump moments after the shooting, flanked by Secret Service agents with his arm raised aloft, blood dripping from his ear, with a Stars and Stripes flag behind him hoisted high, that huge flag they had. It has all the hallmarks, though whether it was intended at the time or not, I suspect not, because it was all moving so quickly, of Joe Rosenthal's famous photograph of the American flag being hoisted aloft on the island of Iwo Jima. Now, there's a YouTube film that Mally Davis actually shared with me. I've seen it subsequently shared a few times. It was a film produced about this photojournalist, Evan Vucci, this extraordinary photojournalist. A film that's, it clearly shows a professional who knows just how important finding angles is when you're telling a story. I've heard, and through this podcast as well, photojournalists describe making pictures as a dance, in that you move through the scene in a way where one moment you might reach high, you might go low, you might duck, you stoop, you photograph over shoulders, through a crowd, past objects, constantly adjusting your composition to record the moments in a way just holding up an iPhone just doesn't cut the mustard, really. Now, I'd love to speak to Evan on the show, having studied his work a lot more since seeing that film. I reckon the chance of having a conversation right now lies somewhere between no hope and Bob Hope, as a less charitable phrase used to go. In the future, I hope so, yes, but for the moment, well, I'm going to leave the embedded film on the show page today. Lots of things went through my mind watching this film, including that I think it's incredible that photographers engage their instincts in the way that they do, when really they have no idea of what may follow, not just creatively or pictorially, but for their own safety. Because when you consider it, when you think about this particular scene, in the cold light of day, Evan had no idea that the shooter had been shot himself. He had zero idea that this might be the start of more violence. He had no idea that he was safe from the actions of Secret Service, who'd by now no doubt be suspecting everything and certainly anyone close to the former president. And Evan is about as close as you could get with some of the photographs. It is without doubt proof that we have some very unique, very special people who make photojournalistic pictures. It's both a skill and a dedication to the desire to tell truth through actual, real, unretouched pictures. I don't wish to politicize this, but the next time the call goes up of fake news from whatever party, wherever in the world, I trust that if this picture's used, it will stand as a reminder that covering news takes courage and historical responsibility. That for me was brought home starkly by the photographs made by this very special photographer, Evan Vucci. Right, this week's guest. I am absolutely thrilled to pieces that my guest today, Merryn Glover, will be joining me and my guests on the first and second week of the Scottish Photo Walk retreats. I'll unashamedly say now, there is one place left on the second week. So, if you like the sound of what you hear today, or what you may be learning in terms of creative writing, my advice is go to the website, photowalk.show, and book. So, gauntlet thrown down, advert over for the moment. Merryn is a writer with a wonderful backstory, and I hope today will instill in us that writing can be a magical way to engage your audience alongside the wonderful pictures you make. So here's part one of 2 parts today of my conversation with Merryn Glover.
Merryn, when I talk to photographers, often, not always, but often, the narrative around finding photography is that somebody in the family sort of started this journey with their own love of making and taking pictures. In terms of writing, though, I'm wondering if the story would be a bit more akin to, well, I was always told I was a bit fanciful in my storytelling. I could invent stuff quite well. But I sense that it's probably also greatly helped by growing up in a place called Kathmandu.
Yeah, well, maybe. I was very fortunate in where I grew up, I think. I was actually born in Kathmandu, but grew up a lot of the time in other parts of Nepal, in a village in the Himalayas, in Pokhara, which is the starting point for a lot of the Annapurna treks, and then also India and latterly Pakistan. So I benefited from a very rich context. But at the time, it's just your life. You don't think of it as anything unusual or exceptional. But in terms of what perhaps fed the writing for me when I was young was not so much that I was fanciful in the stories I told to the people around me, but what I was told quite often was, Merryn, you're such a dreamer. And I was often just away in my own world. Yeah. And literally talking to myself. And I think that writing is perhaps just the adult version of talking to yourself. You know, I grew up in a very rich context, but actually often it was my inner world that I spent time in.
Did you keep a diary?
I've never been very good at keeping a daily diary of the things that I did that day. I've never found that interesting enough. Occasionally, like if I'm on a special trip or holiday, I do. But even then, it might tend to be more scribbly notes so that I won't forget. And if I think I'm going to write about this in some way later on, so I just want to capture the essence, capture the really important things, particularly the things that my photographs might miss. But the time it takes to actually write out the whole sort of story of what I did that day steals time from experiencing life. And I think there's always that tension as an artist where you're capturing life, whether that's as a photographer or as a writer. How much are you experiencing? How much are you stepping away a bit to observe and then stepping further away again, in a sense, to record, to actually give shape to your observations? So I do write on a daily basis in a kind of spiritual journal, which is a spiritual practice, a kind of prayer. But I don't tend to write on a daily basis about what I did. I try to write on a daily basis in terms of the creative project I might be working on at the moment. And I guess I would rather direct my time and energy to that than just, had scrambled eggs for lunch.
I'm sure if you wrote about having scrambled eggs for lunch, it would be a bit more entertaining than that. I want to rewind just a little bit, though, and I hope I'm not being stereotypical here, but thinking of these places that you mentioned that you grew up in, I'm imagining and I'm painting these pictures of the elders telling stories, or have I got that entirely wrong?
Yes, I think there would have been that, but my memories of when we lived in the village in the Himalayas, that was actually in the Annapurna region amongst an ethnic group called the Gurung. And they used to love coming to our house in the evening. And our house was really just kind of one long room that was kind of partitioned off at one end for a sleeping space. But people loved to come to us in the evening because we were the only house in the village that had a kerosene lantern.
Right.
Because there was no electricity.
No.
So things were bright. So people would come, but it was less a place where one person was telling stories. And it was more, there was lots of chatter. There was some singing, might be a little bit of dancing. They loved looking at copies of National Geographic magazine that my parents had. And the other thing they really loved is we had these little Viewmaster slides. I don't know if any of your audience are old enough.
You pressed the button and they would go round in a carousel.
That's right.
Yeah.
A little plastic thing that had a little round carousel of pictures. Yes. And you clicked, and the thing was you'd click to a new picture and be passed around the room so everyone had seen it, and then you could click onto the next picture and so on. So, it was a context in which people were enjoying companionship and laughter and song and interested in looking at the stuff that the kind of Westerners had. And we didn't have very much stuff. My parents they didn't have very much money, but also they were very conscientious about not having too much stuff in that context. But no matter what we had, it was obviously of interest to the people around us. And now I find I'm really wanting to hear the stories that perhaps as a very little kid I wouldn't have sat still long enough to listen to anyway.
I'm going to ask you to do something almost impossible. and that is to join the dots between growing up in this incredible place and now being a professional writer. What happened in the middle bit?
Okay, so I went to school in North India. And my first novel, A House Called Askaval, is set there. And you can edit this out, but a brief moment of promotion is that I'm going to be running a Kickstarter. It's just starting up now, actually, because I've actually commissioned an Indian actress to read the audiobook for A House Called Askaval. So it's a kind of 10th anniversary edition of that, which I'm really excited about. Yeah. So that first novel captured a lot of that experience of living in India for 9 years, although the novel itself is historic. It goes back to Indian independence and partition. When I finished school in India, went to Australia, which is the country of my passport, and that's where I went to university, did a secondary school teaching qualification in English, drama and dance. The dance was kind of a bit of a surprise to everybody. It was contemporary dance, so you didn't really have to be very good at it. But then I was back in Nepal, actually, on a year out, traveling the world as you do as a young Australian, when I met my now husband, back in Kathmandu, as it was, although he's a Brit, but he'd gone out to Nepal to volunteer for 6 months as a doctor in a mountain health project, and my parents were actually working in the same project up there. And then he and I got married, and I've then called Scotland home ever since, really, just over 30 years ago now. So there's a level in which I'm always kind of moving between worlds and straddling worlds and cultures in my life, and very much in my writing. There's always, for me, a sense of fascination with all of the different ways in which we can be human, the ways in which we live and believe and behave and interact. But deeper than that, the ways in which we are all the same.
I think we tend to think as writers as writing sort of one thing, novels, and there's sort of romance attached to that. Although there's articles, you write articles, short stories, plays, poems you've written for radio, through to writing about scrambled egg perhaps as well. I don't know.
Well, there is a sense in which in some ways it's perhaps the easiest art form to engage in, because all you need is pencil and a paper, or even just these days with a phone, you can just dictate, and that's how some people start their writing, is in a kind of literal storytelling. So yeah, anyone can write, and everybody does, in terms of just scribbling a shopping list and so on. But I guess in terms of whether you want to write in a way that reaches out to readers, to write in a way that finds an audience, then that starts to become another question. But in some ways, it's never been easier. Anybody can have a social media account. Anybody can have a website, a blog, can put their words out into the world in any form. And a lot of writers cross genres, cross forms. So I suppose for most of us, the decision really is, what do I really want to write? What do I really want to express? And then who's going to find that? Who's going to read it and value it? And there was times when there were a lot of gatekeepers in that process. If you wanted to be published or if you wanted to be broadcast, you had to get through agents or editors or, traditional publishing houses, producers and so on, who exercised a degree of quality control. But now you don't need any of that to put your stuff into the world. However, there's no marker of quality just because you've actually put it out there, nor even because you get an audience. I mean, that's the way of the world. You can get a very big audience with very low quality output, but that's life.
Do you think, you mentioned social media. Blogging is certainly a form of that. For those that were maybe a bit reticent to think of themselves as writers, these are channels, these are avenues that have said, hang on, no, you can write. Quality, of course, notwithstanding. But that initial reticence of thinking of yourself as a writer, social media has probably helped that, hasn't it?
Yes, I think for a lot of people it has. It has given them opportunities and ways to bridge that gap. And particularly because often what's going into a social media post is quite short, it's perhaps not as daunting for people as trying to write a whole article or something longer. Interestingly, I can find the writing for social media more difficult because it is so short, perhaps because I'm used to a longer form, and also because social media is changing all the time in the ways in which it works. And there's been times when social media has responded well to something that's quite polished and well crafted, using those few words very well, like when tweets had to be really, really short. Yeah. And then it's kind of moved to something that's often more informal and casual and personal and feels very direct and very different to the kind of corporate output that we get on social media. So I think for a lot of people who are maybe daunted by the prospect of writing, social media has opened up opportunities for people to just simply be themselves, and that can actually reach people very well. Whereas if we sweat too much over carefully crafted posts, sometimes they can just die a death. Nobody seems interested. So yeah, it's fascinating to see what actually speaks to people, what lands with people.
You take workshops and you talk to people about writing and creative writing. We talk a lot in photography about finding your voice, your photographic voice. Finding your I was going to say literary voice, but that might seem a bit formal, but finding your writing voice, that doesn't seem an easy thing to do. Because, as you say, sometimes I think you think to yourself, well, this probably needs to be a lot more fancy for it to be published or for it to be of any interest. My voice seems to be a bit, I don't know, colloquial.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question. And I can understand how people that are used to working in a visual medium as their primary medium can struggle with finding the right words to go with that. And definitely the words that will go alongside a photograph are going to be different to the words where there is no image, because they need to work together. So it's about the relationship between those two things side by side. But I think it's the same kind of question, the finding your voice in the writing, because what is going to be most interesting to people is you as the person. And I think in some ways creative people are perhaps feeling threatened by the advances of AI. Other creative people are feeling excitement about all the tools that they can use with that. But one thing that seems to be clear for everybody is that in an age of AI, what becomes most important to us is the human being, the very real person who is actually making this piece of art and sharing it with other people. And so I think what is important now is not so much polished words, because AI will give you that if you just want to find some words, but allowing people to get inside your head in the things that you say, and like alongside your photographs, if you are a photographer, for people to get a sense of you as a person. And actually the polish isn't really what they're looking for. It's the interesting, distinctive and flawed human being. So I think people learning to feel kind of comfortable in their own writing skin, in a sense, is the goal, and something that I suppose I'm looking forward to exploring in the workshops that I'll be doing on your retreat in the Black Isle in September.
Very much looking forward to that. You mentioned it. It's your fault. So I'm going to bounce back to you, those two letters, AI. Are you concerned by AI? I know we've talked much on this program about how AI will affect photographers, and already is. But I mean, I've used ChatGPT, and I've used it for research, and I've asked it from time to time, write me a sentence about such and such, and it's come back. I always say please, by the way. I see it's like the Wizard of Oz. I think there's something behind the curtains at the other end. But what comes back is often very clinical. And it hasn't got, it will learn to, I'm sure, have soul, but it doesn't appear to me to have that at the moment. And I wonder, as a writer, whether that concerns you or whether you're embracing it.
Yeah, very interesting question, a big topic. I think I would come back first to say, no, I don't think AI could ever have soul. I just think that is something distinctively human. But I guess I acknowledge I don't know enough about it. I couldn't possibly say overall whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, it's a little bit like the internet. It's a little bit like a lot of things that we've learned to live with, that there are many great gifts, but there are threats. And I think AI is doing some very powerful and useful things for us in the world. It does present threats. It does present challenges. And there are uses of it that are destructive and cynical. And so we have to keep finding ways to deal with it. We're not going to stop it.
No.
So we do need to find ways of managing it as ethically as we can. And I think some of the, lots of creative people are working very hard on that. But I think as a creative person, yes, you can use it. And yes, I do use it. I've dipped in. I've like you have asked ChatGPT questions. I've discovered it gets quite a few of the answers wrong.
Yes.
So that's a thing you do need to be very careful of is still always checking sources and checking information. I have sometimes thrown at it something like, here's all the information about an event. Could you write me a press release for it? And it does. But I just think, I couldn't possibly publish that in my local paper. That just sounds really smarmy. And that doesn't belong here in the Highlands of Scotland. So I've rewritten it anyway. But as you say, yes, I'm sure it could learn to write a press release that goes down well in the Highlands of Scotland. But I know, for example, no AI with no amount of prompting could write the novel I'm working on right now. And nobody else could write the novel I'm working on right now because it's not formulaic. It brings together a series of experiences and memories and relationships and visions that are utterly distinctive to me and to my time and place and context. And even if you told the AI a chapter by chapter breakdown, which I don't even have yet, but even if it got to that point, it couldn't do it. No. And not only could it not capture my voice, but I'm actually working, as I often do as a novelist, to find a character's voice. So it isn't just me that's speaking through it as an author. There's a character voice, there's a point of view, there's a kind of. And that's part of what I'm developing at the moment in my drafting is what is the voice? What is the point of view? What is the quality of this? And I just don't think any machine will ever manage to come up with that. And partly because it will be imperfect. And that's part of its unique quality. And if you look at the classic texts that we love and that get taught in school and so on, they're not perfect. They're flawed. They break all the rules. You know, when you go to writing workshops or classes or anything like that, and you sometimes get given rules like show, don't tell, and so on and so forth. I'm always very wary of rules in my own tutoring of writing because the greatest writers break them all the time. I'm sure it's the same with rules in photography.
Very much.
Yeah, an AI will be able to obey rules. But the fact that human beings break rules is part of what makes our work distinctive. And the fact that the rules are there, the rules are telling us something about the nature of art and what makes it work. But it's also always if you can get away with breaking the rule. Like I would often say in my old hat as an English teacher, when you're trying to teach young people, I would never say this is right or wrong. I would say this is standard English and it will help you in job applications or, university essays to understand how standard English works and to be equipped to use it. But when you're writing creatively and when you're expressing yourself, of course you can break all those rules. It's just really useful to know what the so-called rule is, why it's there, and why you're breaking it. Because then you've got a power.
Mental health is something else. Whilst we're talking about soul, mental health is something that I think is a really important part of photography. I think of writing. Now, I wouldn't class myself as a writer. I love writing. I enjoy writing. It's something that I've come to enjoy. If there is one gift, and I'm cautious when I use the word gift to come out of COVID, that is that I've found my writing voice, that I enjoy doing it because it was that one period where I had a chance to do it. But mental health is a really important side of my photographic practice. And I think it can be for writing as well, can't it? Or writing can be for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's partly what I was saying to you earlier about the fact that I keep a daily spiritual journal and I do also lead retreats in that. And I've actually got one coming up later on in the year in October. If anybody was interested over on the west coast of Scotland.
Please promote.
On my
Please
website.
Promote.
But over at a retreat centre there.
Yeah.
Because very much I think there is a therapeutic opportunity in writing for us to find out what we think and what we feel. And a lot of the time people think that when you write, you already somehow know what it is that you want to say, and then you've just got to go through this mechanistic process of putting the words on the page. Where in reality, even if you think you know what you want to say, something about the process of the writing reshapes that. It gives a voice to incoherent things within you. It helps you see a situation. The very process of finding words and then thinking, no, that's not actually the right word. That's not really what I feel. What I feel is, and it is a kind of emotional literacy in that sense, that you start to find words, you start to find images for what it is that you're thinking and what you're feeling. And then the act of literally putting it down on paper can be a real unburdening. It can be a way of setting it down and saying, okay, I have got that off my chest. I've got that out of my head. Now, what do I need to do with this? Do I need to burn it? Or do I need to just go, okay, thank you. I have now thought that through. And maybe you reread it at another time and you realize, aha, now I understand what I was really struggling with then. So there's all different things that we might do with that writing once it's on the page, but it is the process of putting it down there initially that I think can be incredibly helpful and clarifying for us.
Merryn Glover is my guest on the show today, and she'll return shortly. Now, I'm slightly embarrassed. I'll explain why in a moment. But let me first read a letter from Allin Sorenson with a poem. Neil, each week as I listen to your guests speak about how photography has impacted their lives, I'm reminded how precious this gift is that we're privileged to share. Our ability to capture the world is in many ways a sacred calling. Oh, I like that expression a lot. And regardless of our level on proficiency, we should all take a moment to remember that and be thankful. I know the focus at the end of this month, says Allin, is on street photography, but I don't do much of that. However, I was able to capture a few images at an Independence Day celebration that might just count. The pictures of which, Allin, I'm popping on the show page today. In the meantime, for Poems Along the Path, a poem that speaks to how photography helps us experience the world.
In the stillness of a shutter's blink, worlds unfold, captured in the silent gaze of a lens that never lies. Light and shadow dance on the edge of reality, each frame a whisper of moments too fleeting to be held by time. Through glass and metal we see the unseen, the forgotten corners where life hides its secrets, where beauty is born in the mundane. A child's laughter frozen mid-air, the last leaf clinging to autumn's breath, a city asleep under a blanket of stars. Stories told without words, truths laid bare in pixels and grain. The camera, an eye unblinking, teaches us to look beyond the surface, to find the extraordinary in the everyday, to cherish the transient as if it were eternal. In every click, we're reminded the world is vast, and we are but its humble witnesses, each photograph a testament to the infinite ways we can see, feel, experience. Through the lens, we are all poets, writing with light, etching our hearts into the fabric of existence, leaving traces of our souls in every image, forever.
Poetry for the path ahead.
If you have a poem for the path, and that includes poetic thoughts or perhaps haiku that embraces your love of walking or photography or both or writing, send to stories@photowalk.show. And that one from Allin was particularly good. So as I said a moment ago, I'm slightly embarrassed, perhaps more than slightly embarrassed, because, and you'll hear this at the start of the second part of my chat with Merryn Glover coming up, and I didn't edit my thoughts out, I left them in. I suspected my decision to do poetry on the show as a feature could have been a tricky one, because I think or believe poetry is something that's not easy for everyone, or indeed accessible, be that writing or reading. I think it's a daunting four-letter word, poem. It carries a certain weight. Anyway, more on that coming up. Merryn has some thoughts on that. The photographs, though, Allin, perfect. We're not so far out from July 4th that I couldn't pop a couple up to recognise your celebrations. The chap that was Uncle Sam, he looked marvellously serious and stoic and Uncle Samish. He was like a living statue. You'll see it in the picture. I certainly wouldn't mind chiselled looks like that. So, looking ahead in the year now, we have a couple of retreats coming up. India. Well, it's not this year, India's next year, but we're taking bookings now for India. I think we're almost there, actually. I think we're at a stage because there are some internal flights included in our adventure where we have to say no more, that's it. So, India's coming up, and also Scotland 24. Now, as I said already today, we have the very, very, very final place on the second week of the Scottish retreat available, where we travel again to Inverness to stay on a working soft fruit farm within reach of the most historic landscapes, towns and cities, the woodland, the forestry, the lochs. They are just gorgeous. Plus, I think, and I've said this before, I think it celebrates the feeling that our podcast brings to our community. An opportunity to escape the noise and spend time with like-minded creatives. Nobody will say to you at any stage during the week, could you move on now, please? I think you've had enough time making this photograph, composing this picture. Can we just move? No, none of that. That won't happen. You take your time. You make the photograph, and later on each evening, we'll discuss them. We've changed the way we're going to do feedback as well, so there's a little bit more feedback as the week goes along, if you so wish for it. We'll be embracing, for some, new creative challenges. We've been going into the darkroom now ever since the retreat has happened in Scotland. We go to a darkroom and, we make an art print, or hopefully an art print, from photographs that we make, from film photographs that we make at the very start of the week. And I always think that's it's just a magical start to the week. And hilarious in equal measure. So we'll be doing that. Merryn will be joining us. Yes, Merryn Glover, learning how to make your creative writing sing. I am thoroughly looking forward. Well, she's going to say a little bit more about it in a moment, so you'll get an idea of how that's going to work. And I'll also be talking about how to squeeze sound into your stills photography and make that a part of your storytelling. So it's a fantastic week. We encourage each other, we talk with each other, we eat together, we laugh a lot. And of course, it being a photo walk retreat, we walk together. So on the website, photowalk.show, just go to the menu item Scotland 24 and fill out the form there. There it is. Yeah, I can see you're looking now. Just there. That's the one. Quick, get typing. Quick. I must say I'm enjoying making my my themed pictures, my sketchbook images. For those that are new or newish to the show, the sketchbook, it's just my phrase for the photographs that I take. I don't like to call them snaps, I call them sketchbooks. Sketchbooks of life, photographs. And today, a sort of theme, a study, I think I called it. That sounds very formal. Pictures of things in dappled light. So usually when I'm making photographs professionally of people, dappled light is just not my friend. But when I'm in nature, you get wonderful effects. I like the way things sort of appear out of the darkness. The stops of light are so different. As make no odds. What's that phrase? Anyway, I've got another one here. Now, nettles. Usually, I avoid nettles like the plague. You've heard me so many times on the programme going ooch and ouch. But nettles, when you photograph them as dappled light features, they're fantastic. Their texture, their shape. 7,500 shutter speed at f4. F4, really? F4. 160 ISO. Here we go. Moving a bit closer. Just a shaft of light picking out the very end of the nettles there. Right, a first letter now from Herbert Holzman from Bavaria land in Germany. The picture that he describes will, of course, be on the show page, as all the pictures are that you send in to the programme when you send your wonderful letters in. Remember, I was wondering whether to try one of those fog in a can things. That's relevant to this letter. Fog in a can, Neil. Yes, fog in a can. I wanted to make a stylized picture that would perhaps, when I'm walking along one of the pathways that I take in woodland in particular, when you see what could be shafts of light coming through or dissecting the path, they're often not quite strong enough. And I really try to get them as rays, and fog in a can I thought could be my way of solving that problem. So on that subject then, this from Herbert. Neil, thank you again for your podcast. It always puts me in a good mood, and a smile on my face when I can listen to your episodes during my own photo walks. When I recently came to the part where you talked about using smoke cartridges, I didn't. I thought it was more about cans, the fog being in an aerosol can. I remembered a situation from a few years ago that I'd like to share with you. A friend of mine is an opera singer, and we had the joint idea of taking photographs of her in one of her incredible stage dresses in a forest. We wanted this really dramatic look, so I packed 2 speedlights with tripods and a few smoke cartridges that I wanted to try out for the first time. It was a hot summer, and it hadn't been raining for weeks. I certainly didn't want the cartridges to stand on a very dry forest ground. Very responsible of you. So I bought a casserole, a metal pot with a long handle to place them inside. I made the right choice because I later found out how hot they really do get on the outside, these things. We started the photo shoot in the early evening twilight, which allowed for a perfect mix of ambient light and illumination by the speedlights. However, I'm never sure I like a however, I learned a lesson on igniting the first cartridge when I pulled the short string as instructed. A long jet of flame shot out of the opening, just barely missing my face. The label said 1 smoke cartridge should work for about 3 minutes, so we ended up working very quickly. I didn't have an assistant, I did everything on my own. I frantically ran around placing the smoking casserole here and there, and then back to the camera spot again and again to find the right direction and distance for the smoke. There was little wind, but it kept changing direction, which didn't make things any easier at all. In the end, however, we got enough good shots together, and I've enclosed one for the show page. Warm greetings from Augsburg, Bavaria land, Germany. Herbert Holzman. Herbert, thank you so much for that. I shall put that picture on the show page. This is the reason when I've been asked at weddings to use them, I've been somewhat reticent about smoke cartridges. If you have to pull something to ignite it, there's an even stronger reticence. Those purple smoke cartridges, I've heard stories where the colour leaks, goes all over the dress. Can you imagine that? Oh, I'm so sorry. I've wrecked your whatever £1,000 worth of dress. The idea of the smoke or fog being in a can was far more attractive from that particular angle, but I do need to find out a little bit more about the environmental aspect. So I'm not absolutely convinced that an aerosol for my creative fog making is necessarily the best thing for the environment. I'll get back to you on that one. Two things we must do before the second and final part of my chat today with Merryn Glover. I must say just quickly that I'm thoroughly looking forward to meeting Merryn, and I suspect we're going to be recording more about writing in person together, the two of us. And of course we'll have an episode recorded on the photo walk retreat anyway. We always do that. There's always a week to come out of that, and with 2 weeks of retreat, I expect we're going to end up with a super show full of creative, wonderful people that will be with us on that adventure in Scotland this year. So 2 things we must do before the second part of my chat then. First, the assignment this month. This year, it's 1-word assignments, and this one is set by John Angerson, the documentary photographer. Now, the word that he's chosen is destroy. I've allowed, and I hope it's okay with John, the word destruction as well. So, but destroy is, I suppose they do have nuance. They're slightly different words, Neil. I can hear John saying it, I know. But if you'd like to get your assignment picture in, then please send them in, and I'll be populating them on the assignments page. It's fascinating to see how creative you are with these assignments each month. I actually think, I really believe this is a fabulous opportunity for us to learn off each other by looking at our creativity when it comes to these one words that we use for the assignment pictures sent in. Send them into stories at photowalk.show, stories at photowalk.show. If you can send them in 2,500 pixels wide, you're an absolute star. But if you can't, don't worry. A full resolution picture and just one picture, please. And I'll do the heavy lifting for you. No watermarks, anything like that. But do please send in links, because of course I would love to link to your Instagram, your website, your Flickr, all three. Whatever you send in, if you can send me the URL, then that's handy, thank you. And the second is our shutter sync. Now, shutter sync is a feature we've been doing for, it's a month now, where we all make a picture at the same time, and that describes where you're listening to the program, the show, at this time, as I do a countdown from 3 to 1, and then click. So that's why we call it shutter sync. We're all in sync together, but we're not necessarily doing the same things. As we found out, people are doing wildly different things whilst listening to the photo walk. Not necessarily always making a walk and making photographs, but that doesn't matter. Wherever you listen, be honest, raise your camera. Smartphones are included in this feature. I'm not sure if I do have dappled light here, so I could actually continue my theme as I make my shutter sync picture, because I'm going to make one with you. So I'm going to count down from 3 to 1 and then say, or you'll hear the shutter click from my X100. All click together, then send your pictures in, same address, stories at photowalk.show. Hopefully that's given you enough time to reach for your camera, whatever one you have, and ready it for the shutter sync picture. Then you can send it in. I'll put them on the show page, and it shows where we all are at that one moment. So here we go. I'm going to do a countdown from 3 to 1. 3, 2, 1. There we go. Shutter sync done. I look forward to seeing where you are. Right, Merryn Glover, part 2, an author and, get this, community gatherer. Oh, I love the way Merryn describes herself and her work in that fashion. Community gatherer. That's almost a podcast in itself, I think. Merryn writes fiction, drama, poetry, non-fiction, with work widely published and broadcast on the BBC, and something I wish I'd chatted with her about, and maybe I will on the upcoming retreat. Having said that, there's a column she regularly writes for the Guardian newspaper in the UK, which I will link to today, called Country Diary, which is fabulous. So here's part 2 of my conversation with Merryn Glover.
A month and a bit ago, Merryn, I started... I come and go with features in the programme quite a lot. And my latest one was, I know what we'll do. We'll have poetry for the path. And I'll suddenly release all these hundreds of poetry writers to write ideas in about what they feel about the world or the photography or whatever. And we'll read it as we go along the path. It wasn't one of my better ideas. But I think poetry frightens a lot of people, doesn't it? It's that word. And I blame school for that. Poetry, Friday afternoons, 1:30 Friday afternoons for me in my school was poetry. It was always poetry. I thought, Friday afternoon, 1:30 poetry.
It is the graveyard shift, though, isn't it? Friday afternoon.
Friday afternoon, yes, it can be, can't it? But the fact that I remember 1:30 Friday afternoons was poetry. I'm sure it could have been the same Tuesday morning at 10:30. Maybe it's the way it's taught. I think it's wonderful thing, poetry. And again, I've only just started to appreciate poets like Larkin, probably through this podcast, funnily enough. I do so wish that it didn't seem so hoi polloi or something that only the others do.
Yeah, well, I feel quite passionately about it, having worked as an English teacher and being a writer, is that I do think, unfortunately, a lot of English is not taught well, and that's not the fault of the teachers. It's the way curriculums are set up and examinations are set up and assessments and so on, that there's a pressure to get kids through these hoops and get them ticked off and sort of branded on the butt that they've now got a B in English or whatever.
Yes.
Whereas really, and no writer ever writes to an exam or to a set of assessment questions or goes through and ticks off, have they used all the relevant literary techniques and so on. So I really think that when in schools and with young people, we take them through literature, it should still be in the same way when we held a child on the sofa at night and read them a story. It should still be about that being transported into another time and place and world, going through the wardrobe, and what really needs to happen in schools, I think, is that right up through high school, not only are young people being given lots of opportunities to be taken into the magic of literature and the worlds that are being created by writers, but that they're encouraged to keep going with their own writing. And one of the things that I found was quite a switch off for my own boys when they went to high school is they were no longer being encouraged to write their own poetry and their own stories. And then they started to really switch off from what was being imposed upon them as something they then had to study and dissect. Whereas actually, it's when you're trying to write your own poetry that you begin to go, that's really interesting. How does he do that? How did Gerard Manley Hopkins run all those words together so that they just roll off the tongue and they don't necessarily make sense, but then they do? It's when you're trying to do stuff yourself that then you go to look at the experts and think, how did they do that? Yeah. And that's where technique begins to matter to you, because you're really trying to get a handle on it yourself. And I just think most young people are not going to try and become professional writers, but they need that opportunity, that joy of expressing themselves in words, in writing. I had some inspirational teachers when I went to school where instead of always having to write essays, you could do a creative response to a work of writing. You could design the costumes for something. And it was a way of actually just trying to open up the richness and the world and the personalities of this work of literature, and accepting a lot of children are not going to have the intellectual interest to sort of dissect it in an analytical, critical way. Some are, and those that are, they will do it anyway. And those are the ones that may well go on to study literature at high school. So it's not that you should never do that. That is enormously appealing to some young people. But it's a terrible switch off for most young people. And I think it is a tragedy that in schools, in the English curriculum, we turn people off literature.
I almost don't want to say the word discipline after that then. But how do you, maybe I should replace it with motivation, but how do you stay motivated? How do you do it every day and do it to a level that you think, I'm broadly very happy with that?
Well, I don't. So, as I said, I write every day in terms of my own kind of journal, and I try to show up to work every day, or every kind of work day at least, on the current project. But in terms of actually getting the words out, I find it really hard.
Do you?
It doesn't, when I'm actually working on, like, say, a novel, which I am now, particularly the early stages of it, because there's so much that's in my head and my heart that I'm wanting to explore and wanting to capture, and I can find it very difficult to know what is the next step, what is the next word. And, there's all those things that I will tell people in workshops about, just writing, you just get on with it. And of course, it's extremely difficult for me to do it myself. And there's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of internal barriers sometimes at different stages in that process. Yes. So it can be quite difficult to turn up each day to do it, because it can place me in a situation of anxiety, of fear. It was Iris Murdoch, the novelist, that once said, every novel is the death of a really good idea.
Ooh.
And it's that, which is sort of devastating, but in a sense, it's exactly true, because what you do when you really enter into a process of writing a novel is that it's increasingly the relinquishing of all the ideas as you realize the reality.
Yes.
The ideas are wonderful. The ideas are amazing. They're so exciting. And in a sense, it's part of what motivates me, is because there's this really compelling idea, these images, these characters, this story. And then when I come to try and put it into my words, I feel I'm killing it, and so that is really painful. But I know now, because this is my fourth book and my third novel, I know now that I will somehow get there. But there is not what I thought it would be. At some point, it will take shape. It will be a story, and it will be something that I will feel, yes, I'm ready for this to go into the world. But it's not what I thought it would be.
You sound like you might be describing a sort of writer's block, although that's not writer's block, is it?
Kind of writer's burden is maybe more the word. I don't know. I mean, look, not everybody finds it this hard. If I could take some magic pill that I could just roll up my sleeves every day and crack out 2,000 words, boy, oh boy, that would be great. But I mean, every writer is very different. So I would hate to put anybody off by hearing how hard it is for me.
Well, it's supposed to be hard. What's that phrase? It's supposed to be hard. It's the hard that makes it so great. What does that come from? There's a film. I've quoted it before.
Okay.
It'll come to me, but I live by that. Whenever I think of my photography as, this is tricky today, it's supposed to be tricky. It's the tricky that makes succeeding so great.
That's reassuring.
I'm interested. I'm really looking forward to you coming to the workshops in Scotland. I'm so looking forward to hearing you. Your workshops that you do, when people come to them, why are they coming? Are they coming because they're writers already? Are they coming because they're frustrated, they haven't got a writing voice? What sort of reasons are people going to workshops, writing workshops?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I guess it really varies, and it depends a lot on what the workshop is billed as. But I've done quite a lot of writing. I mean, it's interesting. In more recent years, I seem to have accidentally been attached to this label of nature writer, which, I just want to clarify, I'm not a naturalist. I don't really know very much about the natural world at all, apart from the fact that I love it. As anyone who's read The Hidden Fires, my recent book, will know, I write about my ignorance and all that I am seeking to learn about the natural world. I love being in it. I enjoy it profoundly, but I probably couldn't tell you what bird just flew past, as much as I'm seeking to learn that. But in all my writing, the sense of place is very important. Perhaps because I've moved many times and through different places, there is, for me, a very strong sense of how place shapes us and how precious some of these places have been to me, almost because of a sense of loss, because I've moved on and I may not go back to some of them again. And I rediscover them by writing about them. So place is very important, and the natural world is profoundly important to me, and a place where I have an enormous sense of belonging and spiritual rootedness, which goes beyond things like nature ID and all of the more technical side of it. It is about relationship. And so a number of the workshops, I guess, that are happening more recently, and perhaps also with the photography one for you folks, is about helping people to grasp that relationship they have with the natural world in words. And so when people like that come to a workshop, what I seek to take you through, ideally outdoors, but sometimes we have to do it indoors and we have to use our imagination, particularly when we're outdoors, is to actually recognize how deeply we belong in that place that we are in, because our body is there and we take time in all of the senses. And for most of your people, photographers, vision is an incredibly important sense. And it is for me too. I'm powerfully moved by color and shape and the things that I see. But often then we just have to close our eyes so that we take time to listen, so that we take time to feel our body in a space and the air around us and the ground beneath us and the breeze and the grass and the rock, the water. And we take time to smell, and that can be extremely difficult. People often say, I've suddenly realized I don't actually have a good sense of smell, but you might need to crush leaves and literally hold them under your nose. Yeah. We're very cautious about taste, obviously. I don't want people picking berries and mushrooms unless they really know what they're doing. No. But it is actually, and this was one of the great gifts that Nan Shepherd brought us in The Living Mountain and her other writing, was to be completely embodied in our engagement with the world, to recognize everything that the senses are telling us about life. And through that, finding the words that capture that place so that we can transport the reader into our bodily experience, even though the reader may be 100 miles away on a sofa 10 years later. So that's the thing I guess I try to bring into my writing workshops for people, is how to imaginatively or literally physically immerse yourself in a context and then find the words that capture that.
I wasn't necessarily going to ask you this as my and finally question.
Okay.
The audience will now all be saying in unison, they'll always, is he going to? Really? But I often...
Is it a notorious question?
Well, not really. I tend to paint it as something that it probably isn't, actually. I invariably do this at the end of the interview, and they'll be saying, just get on with it. Ask them.
Favourite football team.
I ask a lot of photographers what their why is, or most photographers now. I say to them, what is your why? Why do you do this? What is it that drives you? What motivates you? What is your why is the question I ask. And I'd be fascinated to ask you.
Gosh, what a good question. In some ways, I think, and probably this would be true of a lot of your photographers and a lot of artists, it's almost impossible to articulate, isn't it? Because it's something so deep and intuitive and compelling that you almost don't know why. But I guess it takes me back in some senses to that child that was talking to herself and telling herself stories and living in a very vivid imagination. That the world of imagination has always been very powerful for me, compelling for me. But also, I'm a person of faith, and so it's very much a sense of a creative response to the Creator, a sense of having been made as a creative being and wanting to fulfill all that I have been made to be. And there's something very innate for me, my distinctiveness as a one-off human being like we all are, to make things through words, to summon worlds. And I guess, in a sense, I find great resonance in the words of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word. And that doesn't mean that it was literally letters on a page, but the Word as in a message, an idea, a giving shape to the void. And so for me, made as the kind of artist that I am, words is my medium. That is my message. That is my way of giving shape to not just my life, but to what I hope can be a gift back to the world.
And my sincere thanks to Merryn Glover for being my guest on the Photo Walk this week. It was a joy to speak with you, Merryn, and I know I've said it a few times already, but I am looking forward to spending time with you, as is everybody, I'm sure, coming on the Photo Walk retreat this coming year. There's there's 11 of us at the moment, so 6 and 6. Really looking forward to, I'm sure we'll have a 12th, all of us meeting you to talk about creative writing and learn from you on the Photo Walk retreat this year. Now, if you can't wait until next Friday for the next Photo Walk, and you want to walk a little bit further together, then the Extra Mile edition, number 98, is waiting for you right now. We have 2 weeks of on-the-road travels, Extra Mile shows. Next week, I'm at a country fair making portraits. This week, our friend Mally Davis of Treeville. He ventured south in the fun bus last weekend to visit Stonehenge, Avebury Stones, a forest called Savernake, and his first sort of first trip proper to London. And in terms of finding his face pressed up against commuters on the Underground, there are some amusing moments, certainly in the episode, the Extra Mile number 98.
On this week's Extra Mile.
But then to come and stand somewhere like this amongst these trees, I instantly feel lifted. Instantly feel like all your troubles have washed away.
I was joking, by the way, just now. I don't know whether you heard me, with the New Zealanders that were quite interested in not the Stones, but the microphone setup that I had. And I said to them in deadpan, the son, I think, believed me for a second. I said, you know, I don't blame you for paying, because you'll only really come here once, maybe, from New Zealand. And they said, yeah. I said, but they're not even the real Stones. I said, the real ones are in a hangar just over there. And they looked horrified at me.
I've come from landscape, so I'm always learning. And because I've got the ZF now and I'm shooting in monochrome, and the monochrome is quite contrasty and punchy. And with auto ISO, I'm finding I want to bring some detail in. And I never ever used to use exposure compensation, but bear in mind I'm using highlight weighted metering. There's a lot of glass and steel, it's quite a big composition and he's very small in the frame. But what we've got is all these lines converging towards him. He's going, no, come back. My goodness me, I've never seen trees as big as this.
Don't be silly, you're photographing trees all the time.
I've never seen trees.
This is 20 minutes from my front door.
I've never seen trees as big. I'm going to slap you for not coming here. We're going to have a wrestle. I'm going to chuck him at bracken with ticks. How could you have not come here? This is incredible. Look at them. Yeah. They're 4.5, 5 feet wide. And they're oak trees and they're still spanning at least 30, 40 feet high.
Terrible. I drive through this on my way to Marlborough to go to the tea rooms. So the Extra Mile is, it's our extra programme each week, our extra show. It's on our Patreon channel. I've always thought, well, if you go the extra mile for me by supporting the show, I should go the extra mile for you. So we have an extra show each week. And, it's a podcast all of its own. It's not just 5 or 10 minutes thrown together. It's an actual extra show. So there's that, and you can listen to it on the Patreon app, or actually, in a clever, ingenious way, it will also play magically through your preferred app of choice. When you the way you listen to this programme. We also have a monthly meetup for the northern and southern hemispheres. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world. We try and make a time that will work for you. There's polls and there's a few extra things that happen through it to thank you for your support of this channel. If you'd like to join us, then go to the Support the Show tab, which you'll find on the front of the web page, photowalk.show. Right, our PS is to come, postscript to the show. But before that, we need a play-out song. Now, I'd mentioned, and one of the polls we'd run in the Extra Mile was whether we should keep the play-out song. And overwhelmingly, the answer was yes. So we will be keeping the play-out song. It's nice to have spring, summer, winter, autumn cleans. And my Extra Milers, you very much are the production team. So thank you for helping to make that decision. This is a song just to make some final frames to think about what's been said on today's show. And you know my imagination. There's a part of me now thinking of us all sat as this song goes out within one of the woodland areas. We're so lucky to have close where we host the retreat in the Highlands. We'll be listening to the trees, listening to the birds, learning more about creative writing whilst actually being immersed in nature. So as the sun streams through the branches of my walk today, here's a song called Unmistakable.
Easy come and easy go. You're an unfading star, a gentle love, the kind that lifts you up, no matter how far apart. I guess you could call it chance, but we know it's more than that. It's like we've always known, been said the storms weather, short or long, well, I'll still be right where you are. I guess you could call it chance, but we know it's more than that. It's like we've always known, been set in stone, unbreakable. It's like I've always dreamed, true harmony, unmistakable, unmistakable. Unmistakable.
1 hour north with Bayo, unmistakable. Beautiful song. Pups has at last found a river that he'll dare to tread in. He's not the best, well, I don't know whether he's the best swimmer or not. He's not that confident at jumping in the water. Are you, Sir Barkalot? Hey? Hey, you enjoying that though? Sunny day. Oof. I might jump in myself. Oh, spare us, Neil, spare us. Let's make a final sketchbook image. And I've got some more dappled light just to finish my mini-series of dappled light photographs. Oh, I wonder whether this fly will oh, no, he's gone. I thought that would be great, because he was sat in a beam of light on this leaf here. Anyway, let me get a picture. So 6,000th, f2.8. Again, it's leaves, but I just like the texture you get. 160 ISO. There we go. When you're making pictures in dappled light. Come on, Barnes, jump in again while I do the final few thoughts of the show today. If after hearing our conversation about creative writing and a little bit more about the retreat in Scotland, did I mention it to you? I think you did, Neil. Then, yes, go to photowalk.show and look for that Scotland 24 tab. Just a few closing thoughts before the PS. My sincere thanks to you if you are or you're about to become an extra miler. We'll keep building this wonderful community of kindness in the photographic and walking world together. A safe place to share our thoughts about this thing that we do, photographing and walking. A few thank yous to do. My thanks to Neil Ford, who looks after IT. Everything that flashes and buzzes and sometimes misbehaves itself, that's Neil's area of complete expertise. Andrea Gilpin, who is definitely across Instagram, and Kelly Mitchell, who looks after our Facebook members, write a postscript for the show. And of course, I say of course, I thought it really could or should be about putting pen to paper. And well, you can just imagine how hard it was to pick a postscript on this particular subject. Martin Luther said, if you want to change the world, pick your pen and write. Very powerful, very potent, very true. But I'm choosing this one from Pam Allin, and I'll leave a link to Pam on the show page today. An American literacy expert and author, spends a lot of time enthusing young inquiring minds, enthusing them to fall in love with the written word. Today's postscript, our PS then, is from her, and it's: reading is like breathing in. Writing is like breathing out. Come on, pups. Come on, Barnes. Come on. Good boy. Good boy. Breakfast. Breakfast, do you think? I think so. Oh, stick. Nice stick. Stick of the day, that one. Definitely. Do you want to bring it with you? Although that's a bit more like a branch, isn't it? Bring the stick, stroke branch.
The Photo Walk is a Loading Zone production.